He called me a failure in front of everyone. But when a decorated general walked in and saluted me, that boardroom froze. I've been called a lot of things in my life: smart, tough, a good leader. But the one label that clung to me like a stain, the one I could never seem to wash off, was failure. Funny how that word sticks when it's said by the wrong person at the wrong time, especially when it comes from someone in a three-piece suit who's never served a day in their life. Let me rewind. My name is Alexis Ward, former Air Force captain, now a corporate strategy manager in a Fortune 500 defense firm. You wouldn't know it by looking at me in a blazer, heels, and a Starbucks cup. But once upon a time, I was running logistics across Kandahar, coordinating troop movements under blackout conditions, and keeping my squad alive under mortar fire. But in the boardroom, none of that seemed to matter, especially to CEO Blake Kerrigan. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and suck the air right out of it, all cologne, power plays, and cold smirks. The kind who looked through you instead of at you. And if you were a woman, good luck. From day one, Kerrigan made it clear. I was on thin ice. I spoke too confidently. I asked too many questions. My presentations were too assertive. When a male colleague did the same. Bold, visionary, alpha material. That was the tone of our workplace. A silent, polished battlefield where being a woman meant proving yourself twice as hard for half the credit. But I wasn't new to battles. I'd fought harder ones in places most of these men couldn't even spell. Still, none of that shielded me from the humiliation that came during our fourth quarter leadership summit. It was supposed to be a highlight. I'd led the team on a major defense contract initiative, one that brought in $62 million in projected revenue. I built the entire proposal, nurtured our relationship with the client, and even worked overtime to keep our DC contacts looped in. The morning of the summit, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd earned my place at the table, until I walked in. Kerrigan stood near the head of the table with a clicker in hand and a smug glint in his eye. I took my seat, slid my laptop open, ready to present my part of the project. And then, before we start, let me thank Daniel for the incredible work he did on the Stratcom proposal. His leadership was key. Daniel? Daniel was on vacation for half the project. He hadn't written a single word of the executive brief. My chest tightened. I glanced around the room. A few sympathetic eyes, a few blank stares. Most people looked away. I raised my hand. Sir, I believe you meant to credit the strategy team. I managed the proposal and... He cut me off with a wave of his hand. Alexis, let's not get into semantics. You're part of the team, of course. Let's stay focused on results. And that was it. Months of work, erased in 2 sentences, and a room full of silent men in suits. I sat there, swallowing every ounce of pride, every flash of anger, because I'd been trained to maintain composure under pressure. Not just in the military, but in life. But I'll be honest, that day broke something in me. Not because I needed applause, but because I needed someone to see me, to really see what I'd given up to be here, the years of service, the missed birthdays, the rebuilt knee, the VA appointments. Not long after that meeting, word started spreading that I was too intense, that I wasn't team material. In this company, those were the warning shots before a career kill shot. I went home that night and pulled out an old picture. Me in uniform, standing next to General Wyatt Truman, my former CO. A man who once told me, "Ward, when the world overlooks you, make damn sure they can't ignore you." I didn't know then just how literal that advice would become, because a few days later, the general himself would walk through that boardroom door, and everything, I mean everything, would change. 3 days after the summit, I was cleaning out my inbox, already bracing myself for whatever passive-aggressive meeting feedback was about to come my way. Then I saw it. Subject line: Meeting request, General Wyatt Truman, RET. Sender, Executive Assistant, Office of the Chairman. I blinked. Was this a joke? General Truman? As in the retired four-star General Truman, the one who led Operation Vigilant Fire in Syria, the one who mentored me in the field when I was just a logistics captain fresh out of Maxwell AFB. What on earth was he doing setting foot in our office? The meeting invite said Friday at 10 a.m. All senior board members required to attend. It didn't say anything about me, but I knew I had to be there. I showed up early, black blazer, medal pin tucked in just inside my jacket, not visible, but there, just for me. The boardroom was unusually tense. People were seated straighter than usual. No small talk. Kerrigan sat at the head, fingers steepled, jaw clenched just tight enough to crack a molar. Then it happened. At exactly 10 as the double doors opened, and in walked General Wyatt Truman. Not in uniform, but in a sharp grey suit, silver hair, broad shoulders, eyes like steel. Every step he took down that hallway, slow, even, deliberate, echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Kerrigan stood up, smiling tightly. General Truman, an honor to have you here. I trust our assistant briefed you on the... Truman raised one hand, and Kerrigan, the same man who once cut me off mid-sentence, shut his mouth instantly. The general didn't even sit. He stood at the head of the room, gave a slow look around the table, and then fixed his gaze, directly on me. Before we begin, he said, voice low but commanding, I have something that needs to be said, publicly. My throat dried out. He stepped around the table, stopped 2 feet from me. And then he saluted, not casually, not half-heartedly, but a full formal military salute, arm high, hand sharp, posture locked. Captain Ward, he said, on behalf of the men you kept alive, the convoys you navigated through fire zones, and the operations that would have failed without you, I salute you. No one moved. Not a breath. Kerrigan looked like he'd swallowed his own tongue. The general dropped the salute, then turned slowly to face the room. This woman, he said, has done more for this country than any of you in this room will ever understand. And from what I've gathered, her skills were once again deployed in this very company, on a project that succeeded because of her leadership. You could have heard a pin drop on a pillow. When I heard she wasn't recognized, he continued, his voice tightening, I felt it was my duty to make that correction. In person. Kerrigan opened his mouth, probably to spin something slick, but the general raised a brow and kept going. Recognition is not a luxury, it's a necessity. In the military, we understand this. Acknowledgement builds trust. Trust builds loyalty. And loyalty builds empires. Disrespect, on the other hand, that destroys them. Boom. That's when it happened. One of the older board members, a retired Navy reservist, nodded slowly. Then another chimed in. Captain Ward, I had no idea about your service. Thank you. And then another. Suddenly the dynamic in the room shifted. Kerrigan wasn't the center of gravity anymore. I was. The general finally took his seat, arms folded, calm and still. Kerrigan cleared his throat, forced a smile and said, Of course, we are grateful for Captain Ward's contributions. Let's proceed with the review. But it was too late. The room wasn't with him anymore. The power had moved. Not to me out of arrogance, but to the truth of what had just happened. Something changed inside me that day. I hadn't asked for recognition. I hadn't sought revenge. But someone who had fought beside me, who saw me, reminded the world of who I really was. After the general left, no one said a word. For nearly 30 seconds, the boardroom was dead silent. It felt like the aftermath of a controlled explosion, the kind where everyone checks for damage but pretends nothing happened. Kerrigan tried to steer the meeting back on course. Now, if we can move on to Q4 projections. But the energy was gone. Nobody cared about charts or forecasts. And for the first time since I joined this company, people were looking at me like I wasn't invisible. After the meeting ended, I grabbed my things quietly. I wasn't going to gloat. That's not who I am. I was trained to lead without the need for applause. But on my way out, 2 board members pulled me aside. "Ward, I served in Nam," one of them said. "Wish we had more people like you back then. You've got grit, respect." The second one, a woman who rarely said anything in meetings, gave me a soft smile. That salute, it meant something, to all of us watching. And then she whispered, "You earned it, even if some folks here don't know how to show it." Later that afternoon, I returned to my office expecting emails, maybe even a reprimand for stealing focus. Instead, there was a single message. Subject, today. From General Truman. "Alexis, they may never say it, but they saw you today. Don't ever let them tell you. Your silence means weakness. Your record speaks louder than any roomful of titles." W. I stared at those words for a long time. See, here's the thing no one tells you about service, about being a woman in uniform, or later, a woman in power. People don't mind your strength, as long as it makes them look good. But the moment your strength outshines theirs, they either try to dismiss it or destroy it. That's what Kerrigan had tried to do to me. But not anymore. That week, a quiet buzz started building around the office. People from departments I barely knew started dropping by accidentally, just to introduce themselves. A few asked for my thoughts on long-term strategies, suddenly curious about what I thought. One afternoon I even overheard someone from accounting say, "Did you hear what the general said about Ward? She's the real deal." Just like that, the tides were shifting. But Kerrigan, he was unraveling, subtle at first. He tried to act like nothing happened. But I noticed how he stopped making eye contact with me in meetings, how he started skipping strategy calls where I was scheduled to present, and how he quietly reassigned Daniel, his former golden boy, to a less visible project. The balance of power had shifted, and I hadn't lifted a finger. But the final blow, the moment where everything finally snapped into place, came during our next major board presentation. It was time to unveil our new defense proposal, the biggest initiative of the year. Kerrigan was supposed to lead it, but halfway through the deck, he stumbled. He hadn't read the updated briefing, missed key revisions, got rattled when a senior military advisor, also in the room, asked him a tactical question about troop logistics. Kerrigan looked like a deer in headlights, and that's when the advisor, a retired brigadier, looked down the table and said, "Captain Ward, I believe you wrote this section, correct? Mind elaborating?" All eyes turned to me. I nodded once, calm, controlled. "Yes, sir. The logistics proposal assumes a 48-hour deployment window with flexible mobilization paths. Based on my experience managing supply chains in hostile zones, I've recommended airborne priority clearance to reduce ground exposure." I went on, clear, crisp, direct. The room was hooked. Even Kerrigan, hunched beside me, didn't say a word. When I finished, there was a beat of silence, then a slow nod from the brigadier. Impressive. That's the kind of insight that saves lives. And just like that, I knew. I wasn't just back in the room, I was leading it. That evening, I stayed late, catching up on paperwork. As I walked toward the elevator, I saw Kerrigan ahead of me, his back turned, waiting. He turned when he heard my footsteps. His eyes locked onto mine, but he didn't speak. I didn't either. But as the elevator doors opened, I stepped in, held the door, and simply said, "Good night, sir." He stepped in beside me, stiff. And in the reflection of the elevator wall, I saw it, the tiniest flicker of something he'd never shown me before. Respect. I thought after that elevator ride things might settle. They didn't. The next few weeks felt like a slow, quiet battle, the kind that didn't involve bullets, just egos. A test of patience, dignity, and who could outlast the other without flinching. Kerrigan didn't say much to me, not directly, but his fingerprints were on everything. Sudden changes to meeting invites, last-minute reshuffles of project ownership, side conversations with people I used to mentor. He was bleeding control, and he knew it. And instead of facing me head-on, he tried to chip away from the shadows, quietly, surgically. But here's the thing about coming from the military. You learn to read terrain, to detect shifts in pressure, mood, direction. And I could tell the tide had turned. People weren't buying his version of the story anymore. One morning, I got an unexpected message from Carolyn Beck, the chairwoman of the audit committee. She had served on a Senate defense panel in the 90s. Tough as nails, brilliant, and usually silent, unless she had something pointed to say. Her message read, "Ward, coffee, 8:15, my office." I showed up 5 minutes early. She didn't waste time with small talk. "You're steady," she said. "You've got leadership instincts most people can't fake. I watched how you handled that situation with Truman, with Kerrigan, with the room." I nodded, unsure where this was going. I've sat on this board for 18 years, and I've watched too many talented women get pushed out, passed over, or undermined by men who confuse confidence with threat. Then she leaned forward. "Not this time, not you." I exhaled slowly. Carolyn told me there was talk, not gossip, but serious talk, about reevaluating Kerrigan's position, not immediately, not publicly, but soon. What we saw that day, she said, was a leader with real-world experience, strategic mind, and a backbone made of iron. That's what this company needs. And frankly, it's long overdue. I walked out of her office with my heart pounding. Not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about legacy. 2 weeks later, the board scheduled a closed-door review of executive leadership performance. It didn't take a genius to figure out what that meant. The night before the meeting, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, staring at my old flight suit. It still had the desert dust clinging to the seams. The name patch was faded, but the memory was still sharp. 2011, Kandahar Airfield, 108 degrees, and a cargo plane stuck with a dead engine. I remembered shouting orders through static-choked radios, calling for repairs, coordinating evac routes while 2 junior airmen panicked. I wasn't supposed to lead that day, but no one else did. So I did. That's what real leadership is. Not a title, not a corner office, just stepping up, especially when no one else will. The morning of the executive review, I arrived early. No makeup, hair tied back, sharp navy suit. No nonsense. Kerrigan was already there, flipping through his leather-bound presentation portfolio like it could somehow save him. He glanced up, gave me a tight smile. "Big day, huh?" I just nodded. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You're good at playing the long game, Ward. I'll give you that." I turned to face him. "It's not a game, Blake. Not to me." The board meeting was brutal, but not in the way you might expect. It wasn't raised voices or accusations. It was silence. Silence when Kerrigan tried to spin his visionary strategies. Silence when he tried to take credit for military-aligned growth. And silence when Carolyn Beck asked him point-blank why he had failed to credit my work in front of the board that day. He fumbled, stammered, tried to laugh it off. And then Carolyn said, "Captain Ward, would you like to speak?" I stood up slowly. "I didn't come here to replace anyone," I said. "I came here to build something that mattered. But in every room I've entered since trading my uniform for a badge, I've been treated like I had to reprove my worth. I've led under fire. I've kept lives together with nothing but grit and duct tape. And still, I'm treated like I need permission to lead." I paused. "Well, I'm done asking." and I sat back down. The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was respectful. Kerrigan cleared his throat. Well, if there are no further questions. But there were. Just not for him. The board turned to me. There's a moment, when you've been underestimated long enough, that the smallest change in a room feels seismic. This was that moment. The board didn't just glance in my direction. They turned fully, quietly, intentionally. Like the leadership baton had passed without anyone officially saying so. Kerrigan looked smaller. Like the weight of years of unchecked power had finally caught up to him. He tried to salvage control with one last trick. Look, I think we've all lost perspective here, he said, standing. This isn't about identity politics or optics. It's about results. And under my leadership, this company has posted 12 consecutive quarters of growth. Carolyn Beck raised a hand. Blake, no one's questioning your past performance. What we're questioning is your ability to lead in the world we're in now. Another board member, Tom Abrams, a former Marine and aerospace engineer, chimed in. What we saw a few weeks ago, that was leadership under pressure. The kind that doesn't come from books or board meetings. It comes from the kind of experience you can't fake. Kerrigan's jaw clenched, but he stayed quiet. And then, in a move I never expected, Carolyn turned to me. Captain Ward, if the board were to consider a transition plan for leadership in this division, would you be ready? I didn't blink. Yes, ma'am, I would. No bravado, no smugness, just clarity. She nodded once, satisfied. Then let's talk next steps. That was it. No applause, no fireworks. Just a quiet power shift built on years of service, silence, and finally, truth. Later that day, I sat alone in my office, not quite ready to call anyone, not even my old squad mates. I stared at the skyline for a long time, sipping cold coffee, trying to let the weight of it settle in. I wasn't just surviving the system anymore. I was helping to change it. That night, I drove out to Arlington. Not to visit anyone specific, just the section of the cemetery where so many I knew now rested. I walked among the headstones with my hands in my pockets and stopped near the one that always hit me the hardest, Lieutenant Marcus Denton. We served together in Kabul. He saved my life in 2010, took a mortar for me, never got the medals he deserved. I stood there in silence and whispered, "They saw me today, Marcus." Finally. The following week, a company-wide memo went out. Leadership Transition Announcement, Strategic Operations Division. Blake Kerrigan was stepping back to explore new opportunities. And I, Alexis Ward, was being promoted to Vice President of Strategic Operations with full oversight of defense partnerships and development initiatives. The responses were overwhelming, some polite, some congratulatory. But the ones that stuck with me, they came from people I barely knew. It gives me hope to see someone like you move up. You earned this the hard way, and we noticed. Took too long, but damn, we're glad you're here. And then, one morning, a plain white envelope showed up on my desk. No return address, no note. Just a folded piece of paper with a printed quote. A leader is best when people barely know she exists. When her work is done, her aim fulfilled, they will say, "We did it ourselves." Lao Tzu. And scribbled underneath, in handwriting I recognized, "Keep building, I'm watching. W.T. General Wyatt Truman." You never really know when a moment becomes a turning point. For me, it wasn't the day General Truman saluted. It wasn't even the day I was promoted. It was the day I walked into the same boardroom where I had once been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored. And the room stood when I entered. I don't mean out of formality. They stood because they meant it. There's a certain silence that comes after years of noise. The kind where dignity replaces defense. That day, I didn't feel like a survivor or a fighter. I felt like a leader. A few months into my new role, I hosted a cross-agency strategy summit. Leaders from the Pentagon, DARPA, and private sector contractors flew in. For once, I wasn't standing on the sidelines with a clipboard. I was the one opening the event. During the final panel, someone asked a question about chain of command and why so many skilled veterans struggle in civilian life. I cleared my throat and answered honestly. Because the rules change. Out there, it's about mission and honor. Here, it's about politics and posturing. Veterans don't always know how to play the game. But maybe the problem isn't them. Maybe it's the game itself. There was a pause, then slow applause. Afterward, a young female engineer came up to me, probably mid-20s. Nervous, but brave. Captain Ward, I watched what you did. I just wanted to say, I didn't know it was possible. I smiled. It is. You just have to keep standing, even when they don't clap, even when they don't see you yet. She nodded, eyes watering. And right there, I realized something no one ever tells you about redemption. It's not about proving others wrong. It's about proving your own resilience was never wasted. Kerrigan. He landed softly, like most executives do. Some private equity firm gave him a title and a salary, and he moved on like nothing happened. But around here, his name doesn't carry the same weight. What people remember is the moment a 4-star general walked into a boardroom and saluted a woman everyone else overlooked. That story? It stuck. Even now, when I walk past junior staffers, I see the glances, the whispered retellings, the fire it lights in people who never thought they'd be recognized for more than their resume. Sometimes I still think about that day in Kandahar, the one when I almost didn't make it. I was 28, pinned down, no backup. And I remember telling myself, if you get out of this, make it mean something. That's what I've done, and that's what I'll keep doing. Because leadership isn't a rank, it isn't a paycheck, it's a choice. To see others before they're seen, and to stand tall even when the room tries to shrink you. Respect is earned in silence, not demanded in noise. Your story, your worth, isn't defined by the ones who ignore it. It's defined by the ones who stand up when it matters most. If this story moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, if you believe in the power of quiet strength, like this video. Comment your thoughts or your own story. Subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful narratives like this, because sometimes the loudest victories come from the ones who were told to sit down and stay silent. And they stood anyway.